working out on the bench in the lab. Yeah. I launched that GoFundMe last week for the healthcare costs, which I'm very thankful. It's doing very well. I got halfway to about what I expect to need as a minimum for this year, and I've raised about half of what I expect to pay in health insurance. Last year, I spent about $10,000 out of pocket, and this year it's going to be twice that. So I don't really know what I'm going to do. Some of the questions people were asking me, saying, well, what are your health problems? There are many, which is one of the reasons that it's so expensive, because all the specialists I have to see for the various completely unrelated physiological health problems, a lot of those specialists are out of network. I have a lot of conditions that are directly related to my years of occupational exposure to chemicals and solvents, from Frantone. And before Frantone, I worked in industry. I worked in the manufacturing industry. I was the electronics engineer for a company that did motor control systems, and for that I worked for a rental shop where I worked with gasoline and solvents and turpentine and stuff every day, cleaning machines and equipment that we had. And before that, I worked in a job as a map maker, and I had to work with acetone every day because the maps were done on transparencies. They were photographed with this huge format camera, but all the maps were done with clear, sticky transfer stuff. It was a kind of weird process. We're talking the 80s, and in order to edit the maps, you'd have to tear up strips of everything would be laid down on this adhesive, like clear adhesive tape, lines, characters, everything would be laid out on this transparency, and that would be put up on this huge illuminated board and then photographed in this large format camera, like actual size, and then lithographs we made from that so that maps could be printed. It was for the township, and but I had to clean the maps and edit the maps using acetone every day because they were on these mylar sheets. And and I honestly think acetone is probably the reason that I have most of the health problems, because when I looked back at my 45-year history as a working stiff, going back to my teens, just about every job that I had to work with acetone, or I had to work with resins, which required cleaning with acetone and stuff. Because when I was in my teens, I had this job doing drafting work for a company that made these optical things, and I would have to laminate these little optical sheets and devices and stuff, because I did the drafting work, and I also did design and assembly of these little optical machines. And acetone, we used acetone and alcohol to clean up everything, because I was always mixing up resin and having to pour resin, and it was a big part of my job, doing laminating resins and such. And then the mat making job, and then other jobs I had in industry, working with chemicals that are banned today. Carbon tetrachloride I used a lot in the old days. The universal solvent, MEK, methyl ethyl ketone, toluene, a lot of turpentine, and a lot of acetone, alcohol, and other solvents too. I spent decades in a paint room, actually 4 paint rooms, because I had to build 4 of them because I had to move so often. But I spent decades in paint rooms, painting cases with epoxy enamel. I spent decades doing silkscreen with enamel. I couldn't even get the enamel paint anymore, but towards the end of Frantone, they actually stopped making the oil-based enamel paint that I was using in the Frantone days, because the solvents that were in that ink, the silk screening ink, Solvents were banned, I guess, in the 90s. But doing etching my own circuit boards, I worked with a lot of oxidizers, and of course the boards had to be cleaned again with acetone. And when I was painting, in addition to doing the painting, all the cases had to be chemically treated before they were painted, and all that was done with turpentine. And so yeah, I've got decades of occupational exposure to solvents, and of course lead, mercury, and all that stuff from time I was a kid. But the end effect is that I've got a whole host of physiological and neurological problems, some of them serious, that are continuing to evolve, and every year they require more and more medical attention. But aside from that, I also just have the regular old folks stuff. I've got, osteoporosis. Well, it's sort of actually, it was osteoporosis 2 years ago, and I went on a regimen of increasing my weighted exercise and changing my diet. And the last DEXA scan I had, it had gone from osteoporosis just up to the line of osteopenia. So I actually gained back some bone density. It's still osteopenia, like right on the line, but as of the last DEXA scan I had, it was no longer officially osteoporosis. I got it up just up to the line, so I'm happy with that. But I have peripheral neuropathy, which is caused by the solvents, which is continuing to get worse. And 2.5 years ago, I developed autonomic neuropathy, which is the same neurological condition, the degradation of the nervous system. Basically the nervous system shuts down. The signals from my brain don't reach the extremities. And I went through grueling tests, those tests that they had in The Right Stuff, the film The Right Stuff, where they have those electrified needles that they put into the nerve and causes your muscles to spasm. I actually went through those actual tests on my arms to determine nerve efficiency, and it turned out that I basically have, as of 5 years ago, I had 60% diminishment on the left side of my body and 40% diminishment of signals on the right side of my body. But that's gotten worse over the last 5 years. So the peripheral neuropathy, and then 3 years ago developed autonomic neuropathy, which affects all of my core autonomic systems. That's why I developed tachycardia, my digestion, respiration, blood pressure, body temperature, like things like the sweat response, digestion. All these things are now affected by autonomic neuropathy, and so I'm on drugs, beta blockers and such, to try and rein in some of the chaos in my autonomic systems. But as a consequence, I have to see cardiologists regularly, and it also means that I have a regular heartbeat and such, like very low blood pressure, and that's affecting some other critical things this year with my ability for my body to get rid of toxins, which is a new problem. And I've got the usual old person problems of dry eye and dry eye disease, cataracts, things like that. So I have to see ophthalmologists every year. I've got foot problems because I was born with club feet, and now that I've been clobbing around on my distorted feet for the last 6 decades, I have chronic problems with my feet that have to be looked at. My feet are so messed up. So podiatrists, weird, the podiatrist is not something covered by the insurance, so the problems with my toes and all the weird outer bones and stuff that are all out of whack, and I've got to be paying out of pocket for that. Yeah, so I have all these things, and the occupational exposure problems are getting worse. That stuff is all sort of progressing. So every year I've got new issues related to things that are controlled by the nervous system. And now that I've got the autonomic neuropathy, and there's all kinds of weird side problems, like I don't sweat like when I have to, and when the temperature's cold, my body doesn't regulate. My body doesn't regulate body temperature anymore. So with the weather the way it is now, where it can be like sub-zero in the wintertime, and it's regularly 100 degrees or more in the summertime every day in Philly. It can keep me pretty much inside all the time, just because I can't vent my body heat in the summer, and I can't get body heat to my extremities in the winter. But that's one of the other things about the autonomic neuropathy is my circulatory system. There's a subsystem in the autonomic systems that controls vascular flow. So like that, in your veins, there's a network of muscles that controls the flow of blood to your extremities. It's part of the stress response too. Like if you're in a fight or flight mode, like if you're running for your life, it's part of the in the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, they talk about this a lot, but it's like in the fight or flight response of the mammal, we have these little valves, these little muscular valves in all of the veins to be able to regulate the flow of blood to our extremities. And so when we're stressed, those muscles in the extremities all contract to restrict the blood flow to our extremities, basically keep the blood in the core. It's one of the ways that that mammals survive attack, because if you're going to be mauled by a tiger and you get your arm chewed off, you want to the veins all kind of constrict, bring the blood into the core so that keep blood going to the brain, and so that if you get injured you don't bleed as much. Well, but like that system of like regulating blood flow to the extremities, it's also how we cool off, and it's also how we stay warm in the winter. But that system is totally screwed in my body. I have no way of regulating the flow of blood. It's totally random. But all this stuff is going to cost a fortune. I figure this year it'll cost me upwards of 20 grand. So the GoFundMe, it's amazing the generosity of people. So there are a few donors in there that are totally off the charts as far as what they put in. But my hope was to be able to collect enough in funds for the healthcare with the GoFundMe that I wouldn't have to take anything out of the FranLab funds for FranLab, which I really can't afford to do, because FranLab is 100% funded, but just barely. So if I go having to go into the FranLab till to pay healthcare stuff, it's not gonna work. So I really need the GoFundMe to somehow this year, at least by the end of the year, to get somewhere near goal. And as I said last week, the GoFundMe has really two goals. One is to try to cover my healthcare costs without having to take away from FranLab. That's one. But the side benefit of that, if I can do that, the side benefit is that I'm currently depending on the AdSense revenue to go to paying healthcare costs. And if I don't have to do that, if I can cover the costs with the GoFundMe, then I can change the format of the FranLab channel to being what I originally made it to be, which is basically about the bench and builds and stuff like that, which I can't do now because people don't really watch those videos. Because I have to keep the views up, I have to keep it interesting and let people see what they really want to watch. And what people really want to watch on my channel, as far as the subscribers go, they want to hear the rants, they want to hear me talk about things, they want to hear my opinion about things. They don't want to see bench videos, they don't want to see things about electronics. That's not what people come to FranLab for, strangely, anymore. It's weird, but it's caused kind of a bit of a crisis of identity, and I talked about this a little bit before, and this is the last thing I'll put on the subject. Because I started FranLab in the basement lab back in 2010-11, I started it as a means to document my little builds and experiments that I was doing in my little basement lab, and it became popular enough that when I built the 1.0, which was the dedicated lab and the dedicated channel, really, in 2013, and I built FranLab on the idea that it was going to be about the bench and about builds, and by 2017-18 I had a real nice format that I liked of doing builds every week and doing teardowns and doing repairs and modding things, and that's when I invested in my wood shop, metal shop, and got a lathe and a really nice bench and build all kinds of workstations over there to build anything I want. And then of course I got evicted from the 1.0, had to move the whole lab to a new location, which messed everything up, but I got it working again, and I got a new 3D printer and did some good build projects, did Project Egress, I did my Big Ass Buttons project, did some really good work in the 2.0, and then I got evicted again just 3 years later, and ended up here, and things got so discombobulated and things are so smushed, I just don't have the room to do builds here, and my 3D printer is not anywhere where I can use it, and it's just been a total wreck since I moved in here. But I really want FranLab to be what I originally designed it and built it to be. I want to find some way to make FranLab what I originally intended it to be, even if no one would watch it. And the only way that I could do that, the only way that I could afford to do that, is if I can get the healthcare funded with that GoFundMe, and I can get off the hamster wheel, do the projects I want to do. Yeah, but it's all about money, and FranLab Patreon brings in enough money to pay for itself, but it doesn't bring enough money to pay for me. So yeah, the GoFundMe has just gotta, somehow I gotta find a way to bring it to goal somehow. And then whether or not I get fully funded on the GoFundMe, I have to find a way, well actually I have to find many ways, to get this old carcass through another couple of years doing work that I think is important enough, worthwhile enough, making content that is interesting enough, worthwhile enough. So thank you everybody who's put into the GoFundMe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to my patrons always. Thank you to my patrons for making it possible for me to do FranLab. And many of you are also contributors to the GoFundMe for the healthcare. So double thanks to many patrons who are doubly supporting me. And yeah, I'm going to remain hopeful that I can bring in the funds. And then if the funds are there, then it's just it just comes down to that I can, the stress is off and I can just get to work and just do what I do. I just want to be unleashed. Fran Unleashed. I don't mind having a job. I certainly don't mind being employed. I certainly do not regret being a successful YouTuber. Successful in the sense that it pays for itself from the generosity of all the people who watch the channel. I'm very lucky in that sense. But I still feel caged, you know. I'm not fulfilling my purpose. I'm doing my job, and I do think that I do my job well, but the job that I do today in 2026 is not what I wanted to do. It's not what I set up FranLab to be, and I feel very desperate because I want to fulfill my purpose, which is to make things, design things, create things, and I haven't been able to do that for a very long time. And I so much want to do that with my remaining time. I don't want to run out my clock making YouTube videos that are basically just vaporware that will disappear as soon as I do. I really want to make things of permanence, things that last. Things like my Nimotube display clock project, like the Big Ass Buttons project, like Project Egress. All these very important big projects that created things that would feasibly outlast even me. So, I want to go back to building things. That takes time, takes money, and I haven't had either of those for builds for a long, long time. So anyway, thank you. In the lab. That's where I work. In the lab. Go berserk. In my lab. That's where I work. That's what you're watching. Friend love. That's what I'm doing. Working at the bench again.